In the time between Final Fantasy 8 and 9, Squaresoft again generated a lot of classics for the PlayStation 1 to help people wait until the PlayStation 2 was released. While the Dreamcast did have classics and highly valued games like Guys of Arcadia, the PS1 had two big-time RPG companies, Squaresoft and Enix, that helped fend off Sega's Dreamcast temptations for hardcore role-playing game fans. Not to mention, Sony had really strong third-party support. That's another big story. The thing is, if you had a PlayStation 1 around this time, you were in heaven. Enix had published games like Dragon Warrior 7, Valkyrie Profile, and Star Ocean: The Second Story. Yet, not only Squaresoft's old rival, Enix was generating a few classics on the PlayStation. Konami came into market and established themselves as a competition to the crowd. Suikoden 1 and 2. While 2 didn't sell well, it's held as one of the few $100 games that's justified its price with how good it is. Not to mention, the king of cult classic games and working design had released Lunar 2, Eternal Blue, and Vanguard Bandits on the same system. This set up for the time between Final Fantasy 8 and 9. Some of the competition was slowly dying off, while others were on the rise. In the meantime, Square released a few buried treasures themselves. Games like Saga Frontier 2, Chrono Cross, Legend of Mana, and Vagrant Story. If you ever want to break the bank to get a hard copy of some of these games now, then I wouldn't blame you. Then again, most of them have been released on PlayStation Network, so it's your call. Anyway, with the PS2 out in Japan already, and the system on the way in North America, Squaresoft would release not only one of my most favorite games of all time, the perfect swan song for the console, Final Fantasy IX. In my opinion, if Final Fantasy VII made Squaresoft a major third-party developer at the same time, giving the PlayStation 1 a killer app, then Final Fantasy VIII was an ambitious idea that helped solidify their legacy. Then Final Fantasy IX was the exclamation point that said that the PlayStation 1 had arguably the greatest group of RPGs on any console. According to Wikipedia, Final Fantasy IX was released on November 15th, 2000 in North America. It was directed by Ryuki Ito, produced by Hironobu Sakaguchi, Shinji Hashimoto, and Nobuo Uematsu working on the soundtrack. Fun fact time, guys, Final Fantasy IX was one of the few games published under the Square EA name. The company would go on to develop the trashy third-person squad-based shooter X Squad, which was a launch title for the PlayStation 2. Squaresoft soon bought out Electronic Arts' share company when Square and Enix merged together to become what we know known as Square Enix in 2003. The team became Square Enix USA and still publishes games in North American markets today. Anyway, the game would become a sleeper hit. Since its release, according to GameCharts.com, it has sold 5.3 million copies worldwide with a re-release to PlayStation Network in 2009. It was also critically well-received. Viewers praised it for its strengths in its character development, gameplay, and had easy learning. The main criticism being that the card game Technomaster was overly complex for how little it rewarded you for playing it. Another criticism was that the game guide told players to go onto the Play Online site instead of providing information in the guide, which the links are no longer on the site. Some people also criticized the game for not bringing anything new to the series, with traits in its characters can be found in other games. It's, can't always reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you gotta stop doing that and go, okay, that worked, let's release it. So let's see why I love this game so much. Once again, this is a game that I'm not giving away the plot on. If you haven't played it already, then go check it out. What I will say is that the plot is not so much about the beginning or the end. It's about the journey. Final Fantasy IX has some of the greatest character development, or as I like to call it, character evolution. Better, shows what happens to characters in an RPG. Characters in the game aren't the same people by the end of it. React, reflect, and change their ways based off of things that happen. This probably is the game's best only game. It does it so well that I rarely see it done better in a game. Sure, it's done better with some characters in the Gears of War series. It's done a fair bit better in the Mass Effect trilogy of games, but not often do you see it done in the span of one game. The graphics are beautiful. This would be the last time in the series to have a free-flowing world until Final Fantasy XII. The world is huge with lots of areas to explore, tons of nook crannies to find, and it feels like you're running around on an actual planet. This element to the levels would explore more in some ways in games like Ratchet & Clank. Yeah, games like Ultima did it better. The thing is that those were more of a sandbox for you to play in that had consequences for your actions. Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, games to those style took how boring questing was to some extent and made it more for a casual audience. The art design is hit or miss. Some people will like the more kid-friendly look to the game. Others will find it childish and overlook other elements despite it. I personally like the look, more of a storybook feel to it, which makes me think that this game was more for parents to introduce a series they love to their kids. The monsters and character designs also look incredible. Every bit of the character design has tons of little detail and it squeezes every last plot PlayStation 1 had. That was like epic, and cinematics only add to how epic this tale feels. This adds to a game that in general looks like one of the greatest looking PlayStation 1 games ever. The audio is superb. This, in my mind, is one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and from an audio design standpoint, it's one of the best direct. Every problem I had with the audio direction in Final Fantasy VIII was fixed in 9. Every scene is back with incredibly well-placed music and plays the plot. Not to mention there's a lot of variety in the music, up-tempo music fights, to softer melodies for more romantic moments, and more chivalrous moments where you did feel you were a knight defending a castle. This is almost perfectly designed musical stamp. This should be an example on how music can bring game's plot from one level to another and make it feel real. It's not how good your music is, how you use it. Final Fantasy VIII is an example of how you can destroy a scene with an out-of-place track, while 9 is the opposite. Not to mention, when people can name off tracks like You're Not Alone instead of calling it Battle Theme, whatever, that's when you have left an impact, and the music in Final Fantasy IX has left a massive impact on me. The gameplay is classic. When I call it Squaresoft's swan song for the PlayStation 1, it was a swan song to a system that turned Squaresoft into a household name. Nintendo may have given them a platform to build a reputation, but the PlayStation 1 built them into a powerhouse. Squaresoft felt it was time to go back to its roots, much like when they more recently released Bravely Default. The game feels like an SNES RPG, which is a double-edged sword. To some it feels nostalgic, and others will feel like they took a step backwards. To me, it felt fine. What Square Enix needed to do with Final Fantasy after what I felt was so bad about Final Fantasy VIII. As for the fundamental core, it's like they took what they learned from both Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and executed on all levels. The game is fundamentally really nothing you haven't seen before as far as fights are concerned. It maintains all the standard stuff like limit breaks, magic spells, and the active time battle system. Battle Party has been increased from 3 to 4 with many unlockable characters throughout the game. The way magic and abilities works as follows. Each weapon or armor has an unlockable ability that can be unlocked by certain characters. Use those abilities as long as you have it equipped, but can keep them permanently if you get a certain number of ability points for that ability while it's equipped. The only drawback is that you can only equip a certain number of abilities as they take up a certain number of points on your character. This adds another layer of strategy, which is a nice addition to Final Fantasy IX, which takes a standard, just a bare-bones linear kind of RPG and feels a little bit more open-ended than what it normally should feel like. Now, this is such a big deal because it turns, just basic templates of like your warrior, your knight, stuff like that, and it gives them somewhat individuality that makes them useful. Also, another key thing I think plays into this, and it shows why this is so much better than Final Fantasy VIII, is the storyline. Plot, if well written, and as great characters, can elevate what would be called by the books to an incredible adventure. It can also make up for lacking elements, for example, how bad Tetramaster is. Games like Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, and Lost Odyssey are great examples of what Final Fantasy IX falls into. I bring this up because Final Fantasy VIII did the opposite. Its plot made elements of the game, like Triple Triad, even worse, and made me think, why do I even bother additional playthroughs? Speaking of Tetramaster, it's a dead weight. This is another card game that fails as a card game. This makes Triple Triad look like Magic the Gathering. Triad was at least self-explanatory. It didn't have all these variations of cards that made one version better than another. It didn't have these stupid stats that would randomly have you win or lose a battle. And it was a big side quest that gave great rewards for those who are patient. The game works like Triple Triad, and I never bothered to figure out how it works beyond its basics. You get 5 cards to use on a board that's 4 spaces by 4 spaces big, where Triple Triad is 3 by 3. Its biggest difference is that it randomly selects spots to make unusable to try and make it more of a think-on-the-fly kind of card game. The problem is that in general, it only makes further feel like the game is controlled by luck or RNGesus rather than a skill-based card game. Thankfully, it's not an integral part of the plot, and you can completely skip over it with no problem whatsoever. Outside of Tetramaster, my only real problem is that Final Fantasy IX feels really easy. A lot of boss fights feel a lot easier than most RPGs, and it can work both ways. Favorites may feel there's a lack of challenge until late into the game. At the same time, I like how it feels like it could be used as an introduction game for a younger generation to get into the genre or the series. So call it what you will, and it's not such a big problem that's a game changer for me. With all these problems that are legitimate, they are forgivable because at the end of the day, it's one of the greatest games I've ever played. There's just something about Final Fantasy IX that makes me feel like, for all its pitfalls, I would honestly forever say it's always in the mix for my #1 spot. It's in strong company with games like Final Fantasy IV, Shadow of the Colossus, Guitar Hero as a series, and Final Fantasy XII. Yes, I am a fanboy to some extent. The thing is that it's my opinion, and I stand by it no matter what. Overall, Final Fantasy IX is a classic PlayStation 1 game. It's in my mind one of the greatest games of all time, the greatest RPG I've ever played, and a game I will forever try to work into my playlist once a year. It has some bias because of the nostalgia of getting it for Christmas and how great of a time it was to be a role-playing game fan. The thing is that if I didn't say that it was my most favorite RPG or one of the greatest games I've ever played in my life, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because it's not me being honest. My final score for the game is 10 out of 10. It's not 100% perfect, but it's perfect in my mind, and that's all that matters. If you have not played Final Fantasy IX yet, you can get it on PlayStation Network for $10. You will not be disappointed.